Hello, everyone. Welcome to the OT Unleashed podcast. I am your host, Eric Johnson, and I am so thrilled to be joining you today on episode one, the OT Unleashed origin story. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm so excited to take this journey as a new podcaster. I have been influenced by so many different types of people. And before I even get started on my origin story, I do want to just give a shout out to a couple of those other podcasters that really influenced me. The first is one of my good friends who will be on this show very shortly. His name is Brock Cook, and he has the Occupied podcast, and he has been so influential on my journey as an OT. And I wanted to thank him and just tell how excited I am to be able to walk in his footsteps. Um, the other podcast that I want to talk about is The Other Therapist. And believe it or not, is two of my previous students, Leighton Thompson Mosley and Karen Zinsmeister, who had a beautiful podcast for OT. They probably still do, but they've had some kids and, some things in the way. So I just wanted to thank both of those podcasters for really setting kind of the tone for what I want to do and where I want to go with my podcast. But let's talk about this origin story for OT Unleashed. Now, I'm Eric Johnson. I've been around the block as an OT for almost 20 years now. And I wanted to give you some kind of context on where I'm coming from, why I'm coming at you today. And the journey for me really started when I was very young. I had joined the Army after not doing so well in college, and um, just 6 months into being stationed in Germany, we were gearing up to go to Bosnia. We were in the field, and as we left, I was involved in a vehicle rollover where the vehicle caught fire, and I was inside of it along with my first sergeant. And as I crawled out the back, I was severely burned. He was severely burned. We were both medevac to German burn centers. And at that point in time, I was put under. I didn't really know a whole lot that went on over the next week. And then my journey started. I met my first occupational therapist as I was rehabbing at a burn center down in San Antonio at the Institute of Surgical Research. And she was awesome. And she saw healthcare very differently than I was used to. And so my journey started with that experience. I wanted to be an OT. I wanted to help people. I wanted to change lives. I had 20-30% burns all over my body, and I really wanted to do something significant. And so the Army had a program where they would put you through school and you would come out with a degree that they would pay for. And so I went to the University of Central Arkansas and got my master's degree in occupational therapy. And then I jumped back in the Army. I was commissioned as an officer, and I spent the next 14 years as an occupational therapist working in all kinds of different areas. I remember wanting to work in hands right away, and my first duty assignment was mental health. And I cannot be more thankful that mental health was where I started because it set the foundation of what was going to be coming. And so I took that journey from mental health. I did become a hand therapist, and it was eventually asked to go to Walter Reed Military Medical Center up in Washington, D.C., where I would learn about brain injury. And then eventually I was asked by the consultant to the Surgeon General to go set up a pilot program in Afghanistan to treat mild traumatic brain injuries or concussions. And in that space, I really started to try to figure out OT in a space that didn't really, it wasn't really designed for it. And it had never been done before. I was the first occupational therapist to deploy with a brigade combat team, and it was a pretty significant time in my life. And I'll talk about that more later. But from Afghanistan, I went back to Walter Reed. I was the chief of the Amputee Center for Occupational Therapy at Walter Reed for a couple years. And then my last duty assignment, I ended up going back to the burn center where I was a burn patient and was the chief of OT for the burn center and saw my whole career, my life cycle come full circle. When I left the army, I had a really hard time, because when your life ends up being something and it ends up becoming who you are and it is your identity, when you start to step away from that, you've lost everything. I was 40 years old and all I knew was being a soldier. And then all of a sudden, I had to figure out how to be a civilian. I was a child. Like, I didn't know what to do. Like, I didn't know how to engage in life. I had never bought a house, I had never paid for insurance, health insurance. And so I really was learning life all over again after having this identity as a soldier. And also, you know, I didn't know how to work with older adults. I had only worked with young men and women who were in pretty good shape. My first job out of the army was in an inpatient rehab facility here in Waco, Texas, and I was so thankful for that time. And I got to learn how to be such a different therapist, working in neuro and working with spinal cord injuries and CVAs, stroke victims, and then and really learned what life looks like after 40, 50 years old. And I'm so thankful for that time. Toward the end of that, I was really excited because I had gotten an opportunity to go teach in academia at the University of Mary Hardin Baylor. One of my colleagues, Dr. Julie Krug, was developing a program down in Belton, Texas, and asked if I would be on the advisory board. And I jumped on the chance to help an OT program grow, and I was so excited about that. And so after being a part of the advisory board for probably about a year, I realized that maybe this is something that I would want to do full time. And so I was very fortunate and lucky to be able to join that program as full time faculty assistant professor there at UMHB, and got to build that program with these three other humans that are just incredible OTs, and just they did such a great job. And I'm so thankful for that time that I got to spend there. And I was there for about 4 years. And as of last July, I have moved on to some other things, and I'm very excited to talk about it. But we won't talk about in this particular episode. So OT Unleashed. The question is why OT Unleashed? What does that mean? What's the point? And I really wanted to build this identity as OT Unleashed because of I was suppressed by so many mechanisms before. In the army, you didn't really own your knowledge. The army owned it. You didn't own things that you came up with. The army owned it. You couldn't do certain things. If I wanted an honorarium, I couldn't receive it. And so I was known as the Army OT guy for a long time. A lot of people in the OT community still know me as that. And then I knew that there needed to be a transition, that I was not the Army OT guy, but now I'm out of the army and now I am OT unleashed, meaning I can kind of be who I want to be now, and I can do what I want to do. And so I wanted to create this kind of identity, this space where we could explore OT so far outside of that traditional place. And and I knew that I had a huge amount of experience with unique populations that I felt responsible for sharing the information. And so on this podcast, you're going to see a lot of different things. I have three big focus areas. The first is that I want to focus most of this podcast on clients. I don't want to sit here and give you all this advice to be a great OT. I want somebody else to do that. And I think no better person to do that than the people that we work for, that the clients that we work for. There is a lot of great OTs out there, and they they have great podcasts that talk about some of the great different ways and strategies to be an OT, and I absolutely encourage you to listen to their podcasts. I don't necessarily want that in my podcast. I don't want to sit here and talk about all the things to make you the best therapist ever. but I do want to focus on being a great therapist, a great human in general. So the first tier of my podcast will be client focused podcasts, and that basically means it's going to highlight previous patients with significant stories. You're going to see, actually, I'm really excited. My first client that I'm going to be introducing is a burn patient. His name is Zach Sutterfield, and he'll be on in a couple weeks, and I'm excited for you to hear his story. It's going to be really, really exciting. But I'm going to talk with clients that have lost limbs. I'm going to have arm transplants. I will have really significant polytraumatic injuries on that they have overcome and what was significant to their recovery. So I really want to focus a lot of my attention on clients and what they think makes a good OT and how they think good healthcare should be done. The second tier of my podcast is simply my faves. It's my favorites, my favorite OTs. And so, like I mentioned before, the Occupied podcast, I'm going to have Brock Cook on. He'll be my very first guest, and we are excited to kind of talk about generational relevancy. Like, I'm 40 something. I won't tell you my real age. I'm 40 something, and why am I still trying to be an influencer and help people in this space? Should I leave it for the youngsters who are doing a lot of that TikTok stuff and and showing all these great reels and everything on Instagram? What does that look like? And so I'll have a lot of faves on. Another one that I'm really excited about coming up that I'm going to release in a few days is an interview with the new president-elect of AOTA. And we had a great discussion, a great conversation, and I really want you to tune into that and kind of see what she's envisioning for our profession moving forward. So my faves will be all these people that I really have this huge place in my heart for, huge pillars and amazing humans in our profession in general. And then the third part is student spotlights. And so if you're a student listening to the podcast, I want you. I want you on the podcast. I want these motivated young humans who are going to shape the next version of what OT looks like. I'm going to ask you questions like, "What's your niche? What do you want to do? Where do you want to go?" I'm going to ask you to teach me something that I don't know. I just really want to get kind of what your thoughts are moving into the profession, things that you might want to do as you shape what we become. And so that's going to be my third tier. So the last thing that I will also do is I'll have a solo spotlight thing where I'm podcasting just on my own. And that will happen when there's something that I want to talk about that happened in the profession or some kind of hot takes on things that are happening in the world. And what is the OT um, approach to either solving that or addressing it or whatever. So, think about, when Kobe Bryant died and we see that death, but there's so much more and a lot of OT implications in a death. What happens in that mental health space for the kids and family that went to school with his daughter? What happens in that space if there are burn survivors? How do they recover from those things? And so I really want to kind of take some time to be able to talk about what that looks like and what is it that what is my reaction to that types of stuff. So also, like, during my when I'm interviewing other OTs, I'm going to talk about their origin stories. We're going to talk about what they want, what legacy they want to leave, and things like that. But there's also going to be some fun things. We're going to have recurring segments, like we have our quick fire queries, which is going to be very quick questions like, what's your favorite ice cream, stuff like that. And so overall, I'm so excited about it. I can't tell you enough that I just am honored to be in a space that I can hopefully continue to influence people to be as good of a human as they can. And I thank you so much, for listening in. And I came up with this ending, this outro, if you will, so that I can encourage you on each podcast as I leave it. And I'm going to leave today with that outro. And this is what it says. It's time to say goodbye, my friends. Keep exploring, keep dreaming, and continue to unleash the extraordinary in the ordinary. Thank you for joining us on the OT Unleashed podcast, where we always want to encourage you to engage, to cultivate, and to unleash. Have an incredible day, and hopefully we'll see some of y'all at conference next week. Peace.